Look back even 2 years ago, right, David? Like Operation Choke Point 2.0, the amount of animosity towards our industry, the amount of regulatory uncertainty and fear and just attacks that our industry got, right? And the debanking and the deplatforming and just the fact that we're even talking about this right now is pretty surreal. You saw Buffett come out and say that there might be things that could cause people to buy a currency not the US dollar. So, maybe he is starting to open up to Bitcoin, but
Sean Hagan joins us today. He's the head of media at BTC Inc. We'll be talking about not just the outlook for Bitcoin, but also the future of the entire crypto space. BTC Inc. is a very interesting organization that hosts a lot of premier Bitcoin conferences around the world. I'll be heading to BTC Vegas later this year. Some key people are going, celebrities in the space, but also key government officials. We'll be talking to people like Michael Saylor and Donald Trump's sons are attending, I believe, and we'll talk about the program for this coming show as well as the future of Bitcoin. Sean, welcome to the show. It's good to see you.
it's great to be here. I'm an enjoyer of the show, David, and
Thank
it's
you.
it's a pleasure to be on here and be a part of something so cool.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you, and it's a pleasure to attend your conference later this year. We'll be talking about that in just a bit. Just a bit. You can give us a teaser and a highlight reel of what we can
Before
expect.
we go, David, I'm curious. I want to do a little bit of interview with you. What is your price prediction for Bitcoin
Oh, I was going to
this
ask you that. All right, I'll give you mine. What is my price prediction? I think. Oh man. um, I'm not an expert on technical and or fundamental analysis. I That was my past life. I did macro research, but I can kind of parrot what the guests on my show have been saying, and I can tell you what makes more sense to me. And I encourage you to answer the same question after me. So I interviewed Matthew Siegel from VanEck a couple of months ago. VanEck has a $180,000 Bitcoin price projection for Q4 2025.
But the previous smallest Bitcoin cycle was a 20x return from the trough to the peak. If we can do a 10x return this cycle, that would imply 180K.
Based on a number of factors, one of the assumptions is a decoupling or a greater decoupling from Bitcoin to stocks. And while VanEck is, I would say, neutral to bullish on stocks, they're more bullish on Bitcoin. I think that narrative kind of makes sense given that we've seen pockets of decorrelation over the last month itself. On Liberation Day in early April, we saw Bitcoin rise when the stock market fell. So that certainly could happen when we have moments of chaos later on in the year. I think another narrative is simply that Bitcoin's longer term cycle may be bullish, but in the interim, there's just a lot of global liquidity that needs to be pumped into the system before we see another surge upward. So until we see global M2 go up, this is Lynn Alden's theory, we're not going to see Bitcoin go up as much. The other narrative is, per people like Lynn Alden, who's done research on this, the Bitcoin price is more correlated with the global M2 money supply. So liquidity is a better barometer of Bitcoin's price action than actually what's going on with the stock market. Can you just evaluate both of these statements?
Yeah, I actually agree probably more with Lynn. I think that, listen, this microphone I'm talking to you with is correlated to the stock market. My coffee mug here is correlated to the stock market. Everything has gone up in dollar terms. And so being correlated to the stock market just means you're appreciating against a currency that's being devalued. So I think it's too grandiose of a statement to take seriously. The reality that I think is absolutely true is Bitcoin is the most accessible liquid smoke alarm for fiat liquidity. My general mental model individually is that Bitcoin equals technology plus fiat liquidity.
So unless we see really dire economic data come out over the next couple of weeks to quarters, central banks may not stimulate as much, and we may not get as much liquidity. So it really rests on economic data. Ironically, I think if bad data comes out, and if central banks announce stimulus, that could actually be a boon for Bitcoin and risk assets in the short term. However,
I'm assuming, you said around 2024. Are you thinking that we have a lengthening cycle, a similar cycle length? Do you think cycles are over? What's your view on cycles?
I don't know if I believe in the 4-year cycle, but let me just tell you something really interesting that I'd done myself many years ago. I took the Bitcoin price, I graphed it on a log scale, and then I took the Fibonacci sequence, which is 1, 3, 5, and so on, and I graphed that next to Bitcoin. And what you see is the Fibonacci sequence on a log scale is just a vertical line, 45 degree. It's just one line. And Bitcoin oscillates around that vertical line. So you can take the Fibonacci sequence and kind of think that's the that's the fair value, so to speak. This is a purely mathematical exercise. There's no fundamentals behind this. And then at the time in 2017, when I wrote that article, I projected Bitcoin to go to 52,000 or $56,000 in the next cycle. I didn't it next cycle high. People laughed at me because that was a stupid call, they thought. But actually the next cycle high was 69,000, so it wasn't that far off. And then I projected it would go back down to about $17,000 the next cycle low, which is where it is now. So I think it's going to continue to oscillate around that kind of fair value. I would say the next cycle high is anywhere between 150 to 200,000 before we fall back down to about 50%, which it usually does, and then we get a new cycle high.
Yep. Yeah, look, I think that's a good way to think about it. I tend to believe in cycle theory. You know, what factors drive or create that cycle, I think can be, interpreted differently, of course.
Hmm.
But I do typically believe in kind of this 4-ish year cycle. I don't think it's necessarily lengthening, but I'm open to that concept. I'm currently not hook, line, and sinker sold on it, but I'm open to it. Look, I think that cycles aren't done by virtue of the adoption curve, right? That's my argument for cycle theory. I think that anything that's undergoing an adoption, especially as rapidly as Bitcoin has been, I think that you're gonna end up with boom and bust cycles. It's just something that's gonna happen, and I think that people like Saylor have brilliantly turned that into a feature and not a bug, right? And you can harness that volatility, and the volatility is a gift for those bold enough to play with it. And so yeah, look, I think that downstream of that, I arrive at this belief that we do have cycles, and I think that this one's not nearly done, like we talked about at the beginning of the show. I tend to agree with your price prediction there. I think it's going to be a little bit disappointing to the upside this cycle. I think that we're not going to crack 200. Hopefully I'm wrong. I think we're going to end up around 160 to 170, and then we're going to have a pretty serious sell-off.
Yeah. What
To be
would
determined.
what would need to happen for Bitcoin to retrace the 2022 lows of like 5,000 again, if that were to
Oh,
happen? That's basically a 95% correction from here,
man.
hypothetically speaking.
Hypothetically speaking, man, for that to happen, I think
And by the way, 2022 was not even that long ago. It's not like we're talking about ancient history.
yeah, man, yeah, it's insane that like, when you really put it in perspective, that wasn't that long ago, but in Bitcoin years, that seems like 1940.
Yeah.
I think that for us to hit $5,000 in price, there's going to have to be a tsunami that swallows the entire east coast of the US. Maybe part of the moon falls into the ocean. Maybe if someone goes full hot nuclear war on someone else, I could see that happening.
Mm.
But even in those scenarios, I think that it's a flash crash, and I think that we end up somewhere around where we are right now, or maybe even higher once
Well,
people
do you
kind
ever
of
see
recoup.
a scenario in which we get a really bad recession and people just need to liquidate whatever they own to like raise cash to survive? I mean, it's
Uh, no, no, I don't see that. I just simply don't. I think that I think that we're in a recession right now.
Mhm.
For us to get to $5,000 Bitcoin, that's beyond recession. I mean, I think that's something that would make the Great Depression blush.
Let's talk about what's going on currently in the Bitcoin sphere. A lot of people are disappointed with how Bitcoin has performed in 2025, especially in light of a pro Bitcoin, pro crypto administration. I wonder if a lot of the enthusiasm has already been priced in, and we're not going to see a new high anytime soon. Certainly, that's what it feels like right now. We've reached over $100,000 a coin, and we're now trading below $100,000. So a slow start to 2025. What's your take on what's going on currently in the Bitcoin space?
Yeah, look, I think that each cycle is slightly different, right? But there's key patterns that always seem to repeat. And I think that's kind of the core of the narrative, the core of the market structure, and then things on the periphery are things that tend to be more dynamic and fluctuate with the time, right? And I think that this time is no different in terms of cycle theory and in terms of things like power law, stock to flow. The main indicator I look at to see if we've topped, and some people might come at me for this,
Mhm.
but I'm a big believer in the pi cycle top indicator, which has not even come close to flashing yet. So I think that we potentially have some room here left to run. I tend to believe that things that repeat will continue to repeat until invalidated. Perhaps that's not the strongest logic, but it's worked thus far. And yeah, look, I think that there's not nearly as much excitement from retail this cycle so far. That's something that I've heard a lot of people talking about. I know a lot of people have been burnt by alts. They bought Hawk to a coin or whatnot.
Mm.
I think that's one of those areas where it's on organizations like us to educate people why Bitcoin, not crypto, right? There's this, to the nth degree, infinite amount of crypto tokens that basically they're affinity scams, and so they suck liquidity out of the Bitcoin market, right? People trying to aspirationally chase gains and pumps that Bitcoin OGs have been able to experience. And so I think that has a slight effect, but at the end of the day, I think everyone comes home to Bitcoin. And
Yeah.
and honestly, this cycle is being driven by people different, right? This isn't a retail driven cycle. This is an institution driven cycle. The orders are coming in from people like MicroStrategy. They're coming in from different demographics of retail through IBIT's ETF. They're coming from nation states. We have a strategic Bitcoin reserve now. So, I think that we have a slightly lengthening cycle. I think that things are more or less chugging along right on cue. And I think we've got some more room ahead of us here to grow, especially with some key indicators that seem to say that we're healthy and have some more room to grow here. And I just think that it doesn't look perceptually the same. Those things on the periphery are what changed, but I think those core elements are still very much intact.
Let's take a look at what you just discussed here. So this is the, let me just pull up my screen here. We've got the pi cycle top indicator. And then I'll come back to your statement earlier about why Bitcoin and not crypto. But first, let's take a look at this chart. What are we looking at, Sean? How should we interpret this indicator? What is it, first of all?
Yeah, 100%. So there's two moving averages here. And I'm going to look at my notes that I have on my browser to make sure I don't get this wrong. So it's
Sure.
actually it's not just two simple indicators.
Yeah,
So
there's
what it is,
yeah, 11,
yeah.
111 day moving average, and then a 350-day moving average, I think, is on this chart here.
Yep. So when you're looking at this, what you're seeing is it's the 111-day moving average, and then there's also that 350-day moving average, but it's
Yeah.
multiplied by two.
Yeah.
So it's not just like the base average. There's a little bit of arithmetic that gets done there.
Hmm.
But what we typically see historically is anytime that these lines converge, it's pretty much it's within a couple days of the top, right? So if you zoom in all the way to each line there on the chart, you'll see, boom, look at that, right where it converges,
Yeah.
it tends to be a little frothy. So, you're not going to nail the exact Pico top, right?
Interesting.
But you're going to be within a couple day window, or a couple week window at worst of timing it. So that's going to be some potential gains you can lock in, right? And
Absolutely.
it gets psychological, and no one wants to sell their Bitcoin at these levels ever.
Yeah.
Because there's some hopium that you're going to get higher. But yeah, look, people, I would be looking at indicators like this. That, I mean, that's uncanny. The fact that it's happened, what, the past four tops, it's called accurately. I mean, that's uncanny, and that's some high performance out of that indicator. And until proven wrong, I'm going to listen to it.
This is an interesting site. It's got a lot of really cool indicators. Let's walk through some of these. So, fear and greed index right now, it's looking like, well, it more or less follows the price, really, but it's looking like people are feeling a little bit less fearful now in the beginning of May than a couple of weeks ago. I wonder if
Yep.
that's just a turn of sentiment, and I wonder if that's here to stay.
Yeah, I think it is, right? And there's a lot of really good indicators on the site. The team over at Bitcoin Magazine Pro, they have a
Yeah.
fantastic product, and it's largely free too. So anyone watching, all you can go to Bitcoin Magazine Pro, check out these charts. It's an awesome product.
Hmm.
They have a really amazing newsletter as well. Just a
Hmm.
quick plug there. A lot of really good alpha can get gained from the newsletter over at the Pro team. So, yeah, look, I think that people are starting to get more comfortable and kind of come to terms. I think that some of that initial fear we saw was, some of the earlier reporting and realization of the R word, right? I don't know if we're allowed to say it on this show, but recession. You can bleep that out if that's not allowed. But I think that some of the earlier reports of that coming out put a lot of fear into the broader market, right? And Bitcoin is not impervious to emotion. It's a human market like anything else, and I think that also you saw that uniquely timed with people coming to grips with the fact that this cycle has some of that different periphery construction compared to other cycles, right? That switch from being heavy hype and retail driven more into the big boys, right? Institutions and family offices and people on that side of the ball. So I think that the alignment of that drove some extreme fear. And I think that people are now starting to realize, okay, it's not as rocky as we thought. Maybe it's just kind of a different environment, and I think people are kind of finding some comfortability with the new world they find themselves in.
You've been involved in this space for quite a number of years now, Sean. What is different this time versus the last bull cycle in 2021? In other words, what drove the retail crowd? And I'll talk about the institutional state level adoption in just a minute, but what drove the retail crowd specifically to buy Bitcoin and cryptos overall last cycle
Yep.
versus this time? Is it the same drivers? And I've noticed, and it's not just me, but we've noticed that there seems to be a little bit less interest now from the retail crowd than a couple of years ago. If you take a look at things like Google Trends and search volume for Bitcoin and crypto, if you take a look at some search volume and traffic volume for crypto and Bitcoin centric YouTube channels, a little bit less interest now than a couple of years ago. What's going on?
Yeah, look, I think that retail interest is always downstream from price. At the end of the day, price gets retail excited, right? They see a frenzy, they want to jump in and join. That's why a lot of these channels do so well, right? People, they
And
see, oh
it's
my goodness,
interesting because this time it's 100 grand was what was
yeah,
past 100 grand was the top, and last time it was 69,000 or just over
yeah.
670,000.
Yeah,
And
it's all
yeah,
relative, right? It's all
yeah,
perception. It's all fear and greed at the
exactly.
end of the day. And look, I think that that's one of the key reasons you don't see retail. Like, and I think last cycle was super unique for many reasons. Okay, you had economic stimulus getting injected into the market. You had people in lockdown. They didn't know what the world was going to look like in a couple of months, and they had to find entertainment, and a lot of people found that on chain. And
Hmm.
it was a very different world. There was a ton of economic stimulus. People were stir crazy. They were locked up. Stuff like Wall Street bets was relatively fresh and new. People were looking into this whole world of retail empowerment and speculation, and Bitcoin was a big winner of that. And luckily, I think through that process, a lot of people got genuinely orange pilled, right? Especially a lot of people in important places, and that's why you see Bitcoin entering the narratives that it has now, and the offices that it has now, with some more of the institutional side coming in as well. So I think that was certainly important, and it served its role. But I think that retail. There's not as much excitement in the air just because, relatively speaking, 60 to 100 is a lot different than $3,500 to 69, right? So, I
Yeah.
think that we got a lot more room to go for retail to get truly excited with, the $10 they're throwing in.
Do you think that a lot of it comes to the fact that during a bull market, there's just an appetite for speculation and I don't want to say gambling, but borderline gambling from the retail crowd, and Bitcoin just isn't seen as that right now?
Yeah, 100%. I think that crypto's obviously a little less risk adverse than like the S&P 500, right? I just had the
Yeah.
Berkshire Hathaway meeting, and you never know. You saw Buffett come out and say that there might be things that could cause people to buy a currency not the US dollar. So maybe he is starting to open up to Bitcoin, but you definitely never expect that crowd to be hot on Bitcoin, right? And there's a reason for that. And that's another reason why these products like MSTR have done so well, right? Because you're able to package the volatility of Bitcoin and engineer this instrument that limits the downside. And that's the beauty of those instruments. So, I think that the risk and the volatility and the speculation is part of the beauty of it, right? That's part of the reason some of these products can exist. And that's, it's almost sort of like evolution in a sense, where the risk takers, or not evolution, natural selection in a sense, where the people who take the risk and take that chance are the ones who get highly rewarded, and the people that wait around too long and don't adapt to the changing environment get brutally punished.
Why do you make the distinction between Bitcoin and crypto?
Yeah, look, Bitcoin is fundamentally different than every other token, right? Bitcoin's the original innovation. It's the actual innovation in money. So, the cypherpunks, Satoshi, they set out to do something and to do something big. And fundamentally, what they did was they created this public ledger that redefined money, right? It answered that, it addressed that question. What is money? What are the properties of good money, especially as we enter into this digital era, right? What is going to promote human flourishing? What is going to have the properties that people of all walks of life are going to demand of their money in this digital era? And it's the most perfect version that could be created up until this point, at least. And the beautiful thing too is, it now has a network effect. If you went and copy and pasted the code and said, look, it's just as perfect, just as pure as Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, no one else is using it. Everyone else is already using Bitcoin, right? You got to go convince people to leave Bitcoin to go do yours. The problem with yours is now you're the figurehead of it, right? Congress can pull you in for questioning, some intelligence agency can get you killed. They can do whatever, right? Like there's way, and human greed corrupts, right? It's more of these like abstract things like human greed and personal gain more so than anything. The best thing that ever happened for Bitcoin was Satoshi disappeared. He walked away. Those coins haven't moved. Could you imagine the amount of human greed and temptation pulling on this guy? Even 5 years ago with how much that was worth, right? And the fact that those coins haven't moved, the fact that the network largely hasn't changed, the fact that it survived so many things like the block wars. Now you got the op return battle brewing, the fact that it survived all these battles and it's remained largely unchanged and steady is all to its benefit, right? That's where you want to put $1 billion of capital, not Ethereum, where Vitalik can roll back the chain and say, hey, we don't like that this person made this spend. We're actually going to use our proof of stake system and reverse this transaction. That's not where you want to put your capital, because at the end of the day, if you end up on the wrong side of the modern day opinion or the current thing, then, poof, money gone.
I remember the last cycle in 2021, last bull cycle, Bitcoin, one of the narratives around Bitcoin was that it was seen as inferior to the altcoin simply because it underperformed the alt market in that bull cycle. So to those people who say that, well, in a bull cycle, why should we even care about Bitcoin? It's historically, at least in the last cycle, at least underperformed cryptos. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, look, it depends on what you want, right? What is your telos? What is your aim? What is your goal? And you know, if you're just chasing wealth and if you're just chasing money, also I think the statistic is like what 99% of all tokens launch end up at zero.
Mhm.
So, good luck picking the 1% is what I would say to them.
Mm.
And if you aspire to virtue and you aspire to things more so than material gain, and you want to have it in a really short amount of time, then maybe crypto is for you. And it's gambling, and you should know that. I don't think there's anything wrong with people going to the casino, right? Like there's nothing wrong. If it's an honest token launch and it's not a private allocation beforehand, and they're not dumping on retail, and people want to play the game, by all means, you have my permission to play the game, but know what you're signing up for.
Yeah.
Um, Bitcoin's different, right? It actually is. It's not a get rich quick scheme. That's not crypto is. Bitcoin's not, right? You know, the people, I would say that the necessary condition for them to ask me that question is their main prerogative is getting money, right? I think you should have a longer time perspective, and you should think about okay, what's going to be a better store of my wealth? What's going to be the actual what network here is the actual innovation and money that I want to foster? And I think the answer is Bitcoin. And by the way, if you hold it over a longer amount of time, you're going to be very happy and you're probably going to outperform people that are actively trading altcoins.
Over the long term, you mean?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about some policy changes. So we're in the midst of a major policy shift in the administration. The Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, they're calling it now. They're expanding it to other cryptos as well. They're considering that. So it's not just Bitcoin. How is the regulatory climate shifting in regards to Bitcoin, and how is that going to affect the industry specifically?
Yeah, I think it's awesome. Look, just the fact that we have a seat in the room, right? I mean, look back even 2 years ago, right, David? Like Operation Choke Point 2.0, the amount of animosity towards our industry, the amount of regulatory uncertainty and fear and just attacks that our industry got, right? And the debanking and the deplatforming. And I think that we quickly forget how drastic things have changed. And so just the fact that we're even talking about this right now is pretty surreal, right? And it's just the beginning. So I'm super optimistic. I'm super bullish. I think the sky's the limit here. I think that Washington has finally realized that this is not something you can just continue to ignore, right? This is something that can make or break your campaign, even depending on what stance you take on it, or your reelection hopes. And so I think that people like the Bitcoin Policy Institute, David Zell, Grant McCarty, they're doing a fantastic job in DC. A big part of what they do is literally just taking meetings with staffers and representatives and simply educating them. What is the technology? How does it lead to human flourishing? Why is it good for your constituency? And I think that's a huge part of the ground game that they have gone without much praise that they deserve. And yeah, look, I think that we see a lot of really interesting policy. Like you said, a lot of these bills are kind of more so broadly crypto bills. Some of them are better written than others. Like, the one that got rejected in Arizona, I believe, the other day. I think that was a more broad crypto bill, if I'm not mistaken. It'll be interesting to see how that impacts the governor's reelection campaign there. I suspect it won't play too well with her constituency, but yeah, look, I'm hyper bullish. And to narrow in on the strategic Bitcoin reserve you asked about, David, I think that with that crypto bill that got signed, which fun note, we have a Bitcoin museum here in Nashville, and that strategic reserve signed strategic reserve is actually on its way to live here in this museum. So that'll be really special and that'll be really cool. And we're very appreciative of the administration for doing that. But yeah, I think that a lot of people have kind of missed a crucial part of that bill, which is the government, by virtue of this executive order, the government legally cannot sell its Bitcoin and it is permitted to buy more Bitcoin, right? Cannot sell Bitcoin, can buy Bitcoin. It doesn't have to, but it can buy Bitcoin. On the other side, with the altcoins, it cannot buy more altcoins and it's allowed to sell its altcoins.
Yeah.
So that's a huge two-tiered structure in terms of the permissibility of actions around these tokens. And I think that is extreme signal that the serious people from governments are echoing what I'm echoing with the difference between Bitcoin and crypto.
Let's talk about future of adoption now. This is an article that was published on Binance.com. Funds quietly accumulating, sovereign wealth funds are quietly accumulating Bitcoin. An exclamation mark. Well, I guess if it's making the news, it's probably not quite. But anyway, that's not the point. The next phase of Bitcoin adoption might be bigger than anyone expected, according to a recent update from Bitwise. A $10 billion crypto asset manager, sovereign wealth funds have already begun buying Bitcoin, potentially to front-run the U.S. government's inevitable entry into the crypto space. And then here we have a chart showing Bitcoin and some bullish signals, perhaps. So when sovereign funds enter, this market participation would create substantial changes to Bitcoin price movements. We haven't seen sovereign wealth funds enter the space yet. What are some other actors that you're looking forward to that will really drive adoption? We had the Bitcoin ETFs launch last year, the most successful ETF launches in history. We had now an announcement of a Bitcoin strategic reserve signed into executive order, although it hasn't been implemented yet. What's next is my question. What's left to do?
Yeah. And keep in mind, we haven't seen the sovereign wealth funds enter publicly.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what announcements are made about previous purchases in the near or medium future here. But yeah, look, I'm most excited on this landscape about corporate adoption because when it comes to government, you know it's you know it's people doing what's in the best interest of their constituents. And on the financial side of things, do I think Bitcoin has a role to play in that? Yeah, sure, I do. Of course, but is that the most important thing to these politicians? No, right? We have wars going on. We have other matters to solve. We have employment data. I think that the political side of thing, it might be a little bit of a slower haul than other people think. And I think that generally, I try to be optimistic. And I think that generally, if it's the right fit and it's going to help people over enough time, it'll probably happen, especially in a democracy. I'm going to leave it to people like the Bitcoin Policy Institute where you can see direct results, and you do see people kind of having this like more immediate game theory play out
Yeah.
is on the corporate side, right? And there is a space race happening right now. I mean, an absolute space race to see who can gobble up and accumulate the most Bitcoin. And I think it's so interesting to see kind of the path that it's followed, right? I mean, you start off with MicroStrategy during COVID, and they fumble their way into this strategy, right? It's oh my goodness, what are we going to do? Inflation's hammering us. What kind of alternative strategy? Like it was basically a Hail Mary, and look where it got them, right? Talk about catching it for a touchdown. I mean,
Right.
this Hail Mary worked out, and but by doing that, they became a first mover and they were an innovator, and they got to write the playbook. And Saylor's a brilliant guy, and he figured this out. And once he realized it was working, he quickly pivoted and said, "This is it. We're focusing on this." And then people started to copy the playbook, right? And then you get people like Dylan LeClaire and what he's doing in Metaplanet, right? Metaplanet, it wasn't a inflation thing as much as it was, I think there's an opportunity in the Japanese market to help people get exposure to Bitcoin,
Sure.
right? It's that secondary effect. It's, oh, MicroStrategy can serve as a vehicle because it was before the ETFs existed, right? People were buying it as a Bitcoin proxy. And then, smart people like Dylan realize, hey, wait a minute, where are some places that this could be successful? Okay, I think this place in Japan with this company called Metaplanet, and he's knocked it out of the park. And then you get people like Mahler's coming in, and you go, okay, well, I think that this strategy works in multiple forms. MicroStrategy has a software business. Metaplanet has a hotel business. I'm going to try to make a more pure play and do one that does a Bitcoin business that it operates and do this strategy. And simply do it as an excuse to have a reason to operate this strategy, right?
Yeah.
That's at the end of the day, if he's being transparent, that's the only reason he doesn't really. I mean, I'm sure he believes in the Bitcoin product, but it's a downstream effect of just needing an excuse to run the strategy. So the strategy itself, I think, is kind of the next thing, right? I think you see people come in and literally launch businesses and companies to simply do the strategy, right? It seems to kind of be like this funnel of refinement coming down and down and down. And so I think it's incredibly interesting, and people are building their vehicles, right? It's almost like Bezos versus Musk. They're building their starships and they're seeing who can get to the moon first. And it's going to be incredibly interesting to watch because unlike politics too, you can get very creative, right? Just because someone's been doing it one way doesn't mean someone's not going to find a more expeditious way to acquire some Bitcoin. And I think it's going to get very contentious. But again, rising Bitcoin prices rise all the ships here. So it'll be super, super interesting.
Let's take a look at the program for BTC Vegas. You already mentioned a few people now. You mentioned Mahler's, for example. You mentioned Simon Gurevich from Metaplanet. What is the theme this year? Immediately, when I first saw the speakers lineup, first of all, it's a great lineup. But a couple of years ago when I attended, there was less of a focus or emphasis on government officials a couple of years ago when I went, and I haven't been in a few years. And now the first people that showed up on this lineup on the summit page, Cynthia Loomis, Bo Hines, David Sachs, the crypto czar. These are high-level people from the White House. Why are there more and of course, I don't think it's been updated yet, but I believe the Trumps are going as well. So
Correct.
what seems to be the pivot this year into more of a or more representation from the administration?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think that it's well, first off, the theme for this event is embrace the game theory, right? That is this year's theme, embracing game theory. So, that's why you see we got Metaplanet, we've got MicroStrategy, we've got, Similar Scientific, we've got 21 with Jack. Um, and then on the political side, you got Cynthia Lummis, writing Bitcoin bills. You've got Bo Hines. You've got David Sachs. And so that represents the two sides of the game theory, in my mind, at least. I think that you have the corporate institution side of the game theory, where people are launching ETFs, they're launching public vehicles to access capital markets and try to basically kind of like arb out this access to capital to buy Bitcoin cheaply and efficiently. And then you got the government side of the game theory. And it's, how can we position to not get left behind as a nation? Other nations are positioning, sovereign wealth funds are positioning, wealthy individuals around the globe are doing what they can to get their slice of the pie. How do we make sure America is not left out? So that's the theme that you're kind of picking up on intuitively, and I think it's gonna be really exciting to see. One thing to note too is that I can't say too much, but the Trumps, Eric and Don Jr., they are coming, but they are not going to be a part of Code and Country Day. They're going to have a keynote uh, during the normal programming. All of the political speeches are largely going to be during our Code and Country Day, which is going to be an official part of the America 250 celebration. So this is the big movement that Trump and his team have stood up to celebrate America's 250th birthday. And one of the first, it's a great American road show. And they're going to have high school football tournaments and all kinds of amazing celebrations to celebrate the best and the brightest of our country. And one of the first stops we're honored is the Bitcoin conference. And there's going to be an entire day dedicated to AI, crypto, and tech at large. And it's happening at Bitcoin 2025 Las Vegas. So that's day one of the event. We're honored to be a part of this official celebration of our great country. And it'll be really, really interesting to see all the people there. We're even going to have a Blue Origin space pod there for people to get inside of and check out.
Okay, so people are going to space? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah,
That would be
we're going
pretty
to the
cool.
moon. We are going to the moon.
I know you can't front run any speeches, of course, but what can we expect in terms of presentations? What are some of the themes and topics that we can look forward to being discussed by some of the names you mentioned?
Yeah, look, I think that you're going to see. I'm really interested to see David Sachs and Bo Hines, right? I mean, they're in the White House every day working specifically on digital assets. And it's going to be incredibly elucidating to hear what are they thinking, right? What are they hearing? What are they thinking? And they're going to share some very interesting updates and nuggets and things for us to expect while they're at the conference. And so I would absolutely not miss those. I think that's going to be some of the most insightful speeches of the year, right? Just worldwide, all events. I mean, for people who are invested in this industry, interested in this industry, these are the people setting, kind of paving that path, from the White House's perspective on this industry that you have a stake in. So you should probably listen to what they're thinking, what they're
Yeah.
saying. And then selfishly, away from all the politics, I'm really, really excited to hear Ross Ulbricht. This is a guy
How did you
where,
guys reach out to Ross Ulbricht? How did that happen?
so man, a lot to unpack there. Well, Ross got a lot of the people that, work in our country really, I mean, in our company really committed to his cause really early on, right? A lot of them, were already into Bitcoin when he had stood up the Silk Road, and they saw the whole thing go down, and it didn't sit well with them. I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with the story, but there was a lot of funny business that went on in the investigation and things of that nature. I don't want to
Hmm.
get too into the weeds, but definitely some funny business that went on, and ended up serving a really long sentence, and a lot of it in solitary confinement, for non violent first time offender. And Ross actually did a call in several years ago at one of our conferences. He gave a keynote speech from jail, and we've been working towards Ross's cause. Our resident artist Tommy, at Tommy on X, he's been one of the leading advocates for Ross and the Free Ross movement since day one.
Yeah.
We actually have a tribute to Ross here at our museum. It's a replica of his jail cell. It has a lot of his art in it.
Mm.
And a petition to free him is in there as well. And he's a very talented artist, actually, Ross. We have some of his pieces here, and he's really, really good. But so we've been a really big part, and the OGs at our company have done a really good job just getting the word out and really trying their best to lobby for Ross. And then when Trump got involved, and David Bailey was at the table with Trump, kind of talking about what should our policy look like? What are your ideas? David took it upon himself to go beyond just Bitcoin and to bring up the problem of what's happened to Ross. So major shout out to DB there, and shout out to Trump and his team that they listened, right, and they agreed that it was a an injustice. And so he made the promise at our conference last year that if elected president, he would commute the sentence of Ross Ulbricht. And then once he got into office, he quickly not just delivered, but over delivered, and he gave him a full pardon. So, very, very humbled that our company was able to be a part of that in any capacity. And I think it's going to be very special. And I don't know if it's kind of the romantic in me, but the fact that Trump made that promise on the same stage that Ross is coming back to give his first address on is a really cool full circle moment. And it's going to be, I was actually just in the warehouse before this call, and Tommy was in there working on a video that they're going to play before Ross comes out, and just kind of setting the stage. And man, like, stuff like this makes you realize, this is bigger than just trying to buy a coin to make some money. Bitcoin is actually changing people's lives, and it's a real cultural movement, and it's a real um, view of the world. And the opportunity to be around people like this and be a part of special moments is going to be really cool. So that's the moment I'm looking forward to the most.
Okay. And I guess people can expect to participate in not just speakers panels, but how else can people participate in this conference? I mean, there's a 3-day conference. What else can people do there?
Yeah, look, it's a blast. I mean, at the end of the day, what makes this conference so fun and the leading conference is that it's where everybody is, right? The thing you want out of conferences isn't just speakers. Yeah, we're able to get the biggest names. But what makes it so special, at least in my opinion, is the networking is unparalleled. The fun is unparalleled. You're going to be around so many like-minded people. You're going to think you're on a different planet. Okay. The amount of connections you're going to come away with. We have a networking app. You can easily exchange information with people. The side events are nuts. The official after parties every single night are nuts. The people you're going to meet in the expo hall. We get emails all the time. There's been like 2 or 3 marriages that came out of our event where people met at the expo hall or at an after party at a Bitcoin conference. There's been multiple companies that have come out of our conference. And so, yeah, look, I mean, this is what makes it special. It's a human event, and there's human interaction. And by virtue of buying the ticket, flying out there, showing up, you've kind of allowed us to filter it out for you, right? We've kind of provided this social filter, and you're going to be around people that also value these things and have similar ideals to you.
Yeah.
And then it's just on you to put your best foot forward and stick out your right hand and shake someone else's.
Is that why you're hosting in Vegas this year? So if people meet and hit it off, they can go down the street and get a shotgun wedding? No, I'm kidding. But
Yeah.
all right. Well, you've gotten a fantastic guest list. I appreciate you coming on the show and explaining what the conference is about. And I encourage people to check out the speakers list link down below, and also use the link down below to get 10% off on your ticket. Where else can we follow you, Sean, and follow the organization?
Yeah, 100%. We're on X at the Bitcoin Conf, and then I'm on X at Real Sean Hagan. Back in, I think when I set up my account in 2016, I was kind of mocking now President Trump. I thought it was really funny. But that's an easy way to remember it. There's real Donald Trump, and then there's real Sean Hagan. I don't have anyone faking to be me.
Yeah.
But rest assured, I am the real one. So yeah, look, I hope to see everyone on X, at me or DM me if you have any questions about the conference. I'd love to help you out. If you're going to get a ticket, use code David. That's the best price you can get. In 2 weeks, prices go up again. And you can get a 10% discount at current prices with code David. So it's the best price you're going to get to the event. We have special rates at the Venetian through our landing page on our website. So go check that out. That's where the event is going to be. So you don't have to worry about Ubering, paying for things like that, commuting, walking. It's going to be the most convenient way to get set up. And yeah, look, thank you so much for having me, David. Your show is always a blast to listen to. It's exciting to be on the other side of it this time. I don't know if I'm going to go back and listen to it. I don't really love to hear myself recorded, but hopefully, I gave a decent enough performance to your audience. I know they deserve the best. You have an unreal guest list, and so, hopefully, I was able to meet that threshold. And
good stuff. Good to talk to you, Sean. We'll put the links down below, and we'll see you in Vegas. That's
code David.
BTC Vegas, code David, May 20. I don't want to get the dates wrong. You
27th.
Tell us. 27th to the 29th. All right. See you there. Thank you, Sean. See you next time.
Thank you so much, David.